back. Man, we had an awesome week last week talking about the extravagant mercy of God, talking about Rahem and how deeply personal that is. And I was just saying, we're just going to go from one light topic like mercy to another light topic like forgiveness. So we have the process of forgiveness this week, and we see this all throughout the life of Joseph. We can sense it building. How is Joseph ever going to get to the place where he will be able to forgive what his brothers have done to him? And I remember I was teaching on this, and there was this young girl that came up to me after I'd kind of gotten all the way through the life of Joseph. And this young girl came up to me and she said, I have a question for you. When do you think Joseph forgave his brothers? Like, when do you think? Like, do you think it was at the moment, right at the very end of his life? Do you think he forgave them? Do you think it was at the moment where he revealed himself? But when do you think it was early on? When do you think? And she was like in her teens, and she had her Bible and this notebook and journal. You could tell she'd been thinking about this and writing a lot about this. And I was kind of taken off guard by the question because I hadn't really thought about that. And leave it to somebody super young to think about that, right? And I said, I have to say, I think Joseph probably had to forgive the whole time. And she looked at me and she said, me too. And I said, well, good, then me too. Okay, so me too. We all say like, but it's like when he's being sold into slavery and he gets to Potiphar's house, was there a moment where he thought, I'm going to have to work through forgiving my brothers? What about when he gains some favor and things are going pretty well in Potiphar's house and he's thinking, yeah, well, okay, maybe now it's a little bit easier for me to forgive. But what happens when he gets thrown into a dungeon and all of this betrayal comes back and he has to forgive? We talked about the fact that while he's in the dungeon, the psalmist shows us that God was purifying Joseph, that he was testing him. And that word test it's purification, like someone who is going to go through a trial and is going to merge as fine gold. And so he probably had to forgive him in the dungeon. What about when he's 30 years old and he's put in charge of all the land and he's riding high, but he's riding high in a foreign land? You probably had to forgive him then. What about when he has his first two children, Manasseh and Ephraim? It's probably not how he thought he was going to have a family. Probably not there. And he probably had to forgive him then. And you can see where this is going. And I just have to be thankful to that young girl because we started thinking about it. Because the reality is that forgiveness is usually not just kind of like a one-time, okay, well, I forgave and we're just going to move right on. And it doesn't work that way, does it? Would you turn in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 45? Genesis chapter 45, and we're just going to kind of work through, because this is the pinnacle. I mean, this is it. The story has been pushing all the way to this moment where Joseph is finally going to reveal himself to his brothers. Would you look at the first 3 verses of chapter 45 with me? Joseph could no longer keep his composure in front of all of his attendants. So he called out, "Send everyone away from me." No one was with him when he revealed his identity to his brothers. But he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and also Pharaoh's household heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But they could not answer him, because they were terrified in his presence. See, this whole time, Joseph, he's been cloaked, right? He's been speaking a different language. He's been in all of this garb. They haven't recognized him. And he keeps saying, "How is your father doing? How is your father doing?" And you see, he did this for so many different encounters. How's your father doing? And see, I would have been terrible at that. I would have said, I would have been all confused. But this whole time, Joseph just keeps saying, How's your father? How's your father? And now all of a sudden, he reveals himself. And he gets to say, how is my father? I would have never been smart enough to pull this whole thing off. But did you notice that he sends everyone out of the house except for his brothers? And I just wonder, just even reading that right now, I wonder, was just even that an act of grace on Joseph's part? Like, he could have had everybody around and thought, well, I guess now's the time. I'm going to reveal myself, and I'm going to forgive them and be nice if a few people were standing around while I forgave, because, that would be nice just to, just to be seen for my incredibly humble forgiveness, right? But he doesn't do that. He sends everybody. Was this just even mercy? Was this just even indicative of his forgiveness, that he's going to show dignity to his brothers when he does this? And he reveals himself. And I wish so badly. I just wish that somebody had an iPhone in that moment where he says, I am Joseph. I mean, I just would have liked to have seen the brothers at that moment, right? Just, what? I mean, I haven't forgiven them. And that's why I want to see this. And it's just amazing. But Joseph, it says that he's weeping so loudly that the Egyptians and all of Pharaoh's household heard it. And this is very, very moving to me. Because we studied last week that Joseph clearly was not, he clearly was not hardened. Because it says that his mercy grew hot. His compassion grew hot. These are very strong terms. And now he is weeping so loudly that Pharaoh's household can hear him. We see that somehow in the middle of all of this betrayal, in all of the loss, in all of the grief, in all of the mourning, somehow Joseph has stayed tender. Somehow he has not allowed himself to grow cynical, to grow hardened. And I have to believe it's because, and we don't have actual proof of that. I just have to believe that Joseph was periodically working this out with the Lord and with his brothers. We know it partially from the psalmist, who says that the Lord was purifying him. And as we talk about the process of forgiveness today, we're just going to look at 5 just simple steps, simple, almost maybe they're more like principles. But the first one is this. If we're going to be good at forgiving, number 1 is this: stay tender and movable. Stay tender and movable. Allow yourself to be moved. Allow God to move you. Because this is the exact opposite of what I would expect. What I would expect from Joseph is that he is angry and he is hardened and he is cynical and he is jaded and he is shut down and he is not ever going to let anyone hurt him again. But we see that is not the case. He is so tender and so able to be moved. And I was thinking about that today as I was preparing, and I was like, Lord, keep my heart soft. No matter what happens to me, no matter what someone does to me, Lord, keep my heart soft. Keep my heart tender. Because those people, those believers in Jesus, those followers in Jesus, they are some of the most dynamic, moving people to be around. Those who have been through the fire, but boy, they still have a tender heart, and they can tear up at a moment's notice. I want to be that. So stay tender and movable. Let's continue reading verses 4 through 8. And I just want you to picture this. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near me." And they came near. And he says it again. "I am Joseph, your brother," he said, "the one you sold into Egypt." I'm sorry, I have to pause there just because this cracks me up every single time, because he's like, "I am Joseph, your brother, the one you sold." And that one, just in case you're lost, just in case you're not sure who, I'm that guy, and I'm the one that you sold to Egypt. But then he says, "But now don't be grieved or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there will be 5 more years without plowing or harvesting. God sent me ahead of you to establish you as a remnant within the land and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, Lord of his entire household, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Okay, first of all, here we are, and we are just expecting, I mean, if you are just looking at this story, and you don't have the mercy of God in your mind, you don't have God's redemption, or his promise to his people, if you don't have any of that in your mind, you are ready for Joseph to look at his brothers and say, I am Joseph, and now you all are going to die a slow and painful death. I mean, that's what we're expecting. And they hear the most terrifying words they can ever imagine. I am Joseph. The three most terrifying words the brothers can possibly imagine here. They hear those three words, and he comes back at those three words with the three most comforting words. Come near me. I mean, what in the world? What in the world? This is forgiveness in its finest. Come near me. And I remember talking to my dad about this, and I had actually taught this, and after I was done teaching it, I got in the car with my dad, and I've told you many times my dad's a pastor, and when you're the child of a pastor, they say things like, hey, I'm surprised you didn't mention, in Matthew, and what was Matthew 11:28, and my dad goes, when Jesus, he says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. He's surprised that just didn't pop right into your mind. And I was like, well, it didn't pop into my mind, but it popped into yours, and now it's going to pop into this talk. Because, thanks, Dad, I got this. But isn't that right? Out of all everything that was done to Jesus, and still he would say, come to me. It doesn't matter your past. It doesn't matter your sin. It doesn't matter your guilt. Come to me, and I will give you rest for your souls. My burden is light. My yoke is easy. And we see this is all just a foreshadowing of this. But he says, come to me. And he begins to let them off the hook. He says, listen, just don't be grieved. God was doing this whole thing. And he in just a few verses, we're going to see that he blesses them in these incredible ways. And so this is number 2 in the process of forgiveness, and this is a hard one. But bless those you think you have the right to punish. Joseph, he had every right to punish his brothers. Now, he did discipline them. I mean, there was a lot that Joseph had them go through to get to this point. And this is not about being a doormat or being a pushover. Joseph was very studied in this process to see if his brothers had repented, to see if they had changed. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. It's not about being a pushover. But he had every right to make their lives miserable and to condemn them and to punish them. But instead, he blesses them. He says, come near to me. This is otherworldly. This can only come from God. But then we see this in the person of Jesus Christ. I've been studying the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus says, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you that even if somebody hits you on the cheek, turn the other cheek. And I remember my sister, my sister Katie, she's got her one son. He's a redhead. And he is like, his hair is not just the only redheaded part about him. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, he's a redhead through and through. And it's just, he's so much fun. And somebody had been mean to him at school one day, and he came home, and he was all mad about it, said to my sister, he said, somebody pushed me at school today, but I just remember what Jesus said, that if somebody pushes you, you slap them on the cheek, and then you slap them on the other cheek. She was like, yeah, that's not how that verse goes at all. But so anyway, but this concept of blessing those you have the right to punish. Jesus addresses this. This is not something that dies with the Old Testament. This carries on like to the nth degree in the New Testament because of the mercy and the love and the blessing that Jesus Christ has shown us. Let's continue to read verses 9 through 11. Joseph says, return quickly to my father and say to him, "This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me without delay. You can settle in the land of Goshen and be near me. You, your children, and your grandchildren, your flocks, your herds, and all you have. There I will sustain you, for there will be 5 more years of famine. Otherwise, you, your household, and everything you have will become destitute." Do you see here that Joseph not only forgives in heart? He doesn't just say, all right, here's the deal. So I forgive you, but I don't ever want to see you again. Or I forgive you, and instead of actually being in this Goshen and being you and your children being close to me, maybe if you could just be a little farther away from me. And I will just say this, in some ways, in our culture today, that would be appropriate. There are so many women, and I want to be so sensitive to this, where all God will call you to be is forgiving from your heart. Forgiving from your heart, where someone has wounded you, maybe you've even suffered abuse, and you don't need to do any more than simply forgive from your heart. But if you're not in a dangerous situation, or in a situation that where it would be inappropriate or unsafe or just harmful to push forward in a way beyond just forgiving from your heart, okay? If you're not in a situation like that, God often calls us to go beyond just forgiving from the heart. He actually calls us to not just forgive in heart, but also in action and in deed. See, Joseph didn't just forgive his brothers from the heart, but he says, listen, go back, get my father, get all your family members. There's going to be 5 more years of bad famine. It's going to be very severe, but I'm going to settle you. And he even says, I'm going to sustain you. This is incredible. This is not just a forgiveness of heart. This is a forgiveness in action and in deed. And as far as the process of forgiveness, this is number 3. Forgive in heart and in deed and in action. Don't just say to somebody that you forgive them. Show them that you forgive them. Remember, that may not be safe or appropriate for every single person. That's okay. Don't take this beyond where the Holy Spirit wants you to take it. But there are many of you where the Lord is prompting you to show that person that mercy. Show them the grace. Show them that is what is undeserved. Show that you have forgiven. And Joseph does this in an incredible way. So first, just to recap, we stay tender and movable. We bless those we think we have the right to punish. And we forgive in heart and in deed. Now, I want you to drop all the way down to verses 24 through 26. So Joseph sent his brothers on their way, and as they were leaving, he said to them, "Don't argue on the way." So they went up from Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, and this is so cool. And they said, "Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt." And there's an exclamation point there. Jacob was stunned, for he did not believe them. But when they told Jacob all that Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to transport him, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And then Israel, that's Jacob, said, "Enough, my son Joseph is still alive. I will go to see him before I die." And the reason I pointed out that there's an exclamation point after they say, "Joseph is ruler over all the land of Egypt," exclamation point. Now, I know in the Hebrew there's probably not an exclamation point. I know that there wasn't one when he said it. But the concept here is that they're excited about this. You're not going to believe this, Dad. Joseph is ruler. And when I saw that word, I could not help but think back to Genesis 37:8. We talked about it last week, where they said, "Are you really going to rule us?" And they hate it. They hate him. And we talked about last week that sometimes the very thing that we resist the most is actually the mercy of God saving our lives. And so they're so mad that he's going to be ruler. They can't stand that thought. But now that they're about to die and they're being saved, they're like skipping home and they're like, "Joseph is ruler. Our brother, our wonderful, compassionate compassionate, loving brother. He is in charge. My siblings have never said this to me, and I'm the oldest. I said, this is incredible. He's ruler. This is incredible good news. And do you know why? Do you know why this went from terrible news to the best news in the world? Because Joseph was not a condemning ruler. He was not an authoritarian type ruler. He was a rescuing ruler. He was a ruler who sent these wagons back and said, put everybody and everything you can in that and bring all of your loved ones and all of your stuff back, and I will save your life. And what was a concept that the brothers hated, now all of a sudden is the greatest news in the world, because he's not a condemning ruler, he's a rescuing ruler. And if we are going to work through the process of forgiveness, number 4 is be a ruler who rescues. See, all of us have spheres of authority. We all have people under our authority. It's probably not like Joseph, but whether it's family members, or it's in our workplaces, or it's in our school, we all have spheres of authority. And the Lord has called us to use that authority to be kind, to be merciful, and to be gentle. Not a pushover. Joseph's not a pushover. You don't see that anywhere. But he is a rescuer. And I want to ask you, is that the kind of leader you are? Is that the kind of ruler you are? Are you willing to rescue those, even those who require your forgiveness? All right, I want to go back to a couple key verses that I deliberately kind of glossed over. Verse 5 of chapter 45. And now, don't be grieved or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. And then in verse 7, God sent me ahead of you to establish you as a remnant within the land and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God. See, he says, guys, here's the thing. It's not really because of you that I'm here. I know you think that because you sold me here. But it's not really because of you that I'm in Egypt, but it is for you. It's not because of you, but it is for you, because God has sent me ahead of you to preserve life. And this was so powerful for me, because I really truly believe that one of the reasons, and probably the central reason, that Joseph was able to forgive was because he realized that he was part of God's plan. There was a bigger story going on. I believe that he was able to forgive because he wasn't just looking at the horizontal terrain. He wasn't just looking at the evil that his brothers did. Notice, he does not gloss over what they did. He does not call it something else. He does not push it under the rug. He says, I'm Joseph, the one you sold. The one you sold into Egypt. But I want to tell you, see, it's complicated. You sold me, but God sent me. What? Well, which is it? It's a mystery. It's a bit of a mystery. But the reason that Joseph was able to forgive was number 5. Because he embraced God's perspective. No matter what has been done to you, no matter what has happened, no matter what unexpected, unlikely path you have been on, I want you to embrace the perspective of God. Because even what is sometimes meant for evil, God can always mean for good. Even though Joseph was sold, God had sent him for a purpose, a really good purpose. And I think Joseph was able to see, you know what, this is not about you guys. This is about what God's doing, and he's using me. And he was able to embrace God's perspective. I actually have the privilege today to have my dad with me, who I've talked so much about in all the years that I've been teaching. And I wanted to bring him up because there's something that happens right before Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. There's something really significant, in fact. Judah, the fourth brother, he stands before Joseph, although he doesn't know it's Joseph. He says, listen, take me. I want to be the one to stand in the place of the family. And this really is a foreshadowing of forgiveness and ultimate forgiveness through Jesus Christ. And we are never going to know how to forgive others until we receive the forgiveness of Jesus. So, Dad, I want to bring you up, and I just want to ask you a few questions about that particular passage, because that's pretty interesting that of all of those crazy brothers, Judah is the one that stands before Joseph, although he doesn't know it's Joseph. Why is that significant? And what does that have to do with our forgiveness ultimately?
Anybody that's been in our church knows that I personally believe that the greatest proof of the Bible is Christ in the Old Testament. Because all the different people in the Old Testament that portray Christ are fulfilling the unfolding drama of redemption, as scholars call it. And Judah is one of those people. So here, the big question is this. Why didn't Joseph reveal himself the minute they came for grain? Why didn't he say, I'm Joseph? He doesn't do that. Because he wants to find out if they have really, truly changed and repented. So he plays a little cat and mouse game. The first being that he puts the silver in the first time. But the second is when he has his servant put his silver cup in Benjamin's sack. And he says, when they get out of town, the servant's going to go after them. He's going to stop them and say, why did you steal my master's silver cup? When he goes out, he starts with the oldest, and he works his way all the way down to the youngest. You can almost feel this narrative. You can almost put yourself there and see this as they're going along, and they all think, well, nobody's got the silver cup. Certainly it's not going to be Benjamin, who's the youngest. It is Benjamin. And now Benjamin, the question is, will the brothers say, tough luck, Benjamin. We're going to keep on going and see Dad and treat him the way they treated Joseph. But they don't. They're willing to go back. So they go back, and Judah is the one that comes in and talks to Joseph, and he says, bottom line, he goes into this lengthy dialogue, but he eventually says this. He says, why don't you let Benjamin go free? Because they've all said, we're going to wind up being slaves. And Joseph says, not on my watch. Everybody gets to go, except Benjamin. But Judah says, let me take his place. Let me be a slave. Let him go free. Let me take his place. Christ is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. He didn't pick Simeon or Issachar, but it's Judah. He's going to come down the line. So Judah becomes a portrait of Christ. Because Christ became a slave of the cross and death so that we could be given life and be set free. And he did it through the cross. And that's where our forgiveness takes place, through the cross and the resurrection. Nobody could have put this together. No great writer could have put this together. And so that really shows the great aspect of forgiveness, because it all points to the ultimate forgiveness. Christ has set us free. He became the slave. He's the one that died in our place to set us free and to make us no longer slaves, but free and alive. So it's just an incredible story. Nobody could have written it but God himself. Nobody.
Thanks, Dad. You know, it's so interesting to me and very apparent that we do not have the capability or the ability to forgive others in our own strength. The only way that we can forgive others is by first receiving the forgiveness of Jesus Christ. And just how Judas stood in the place, Jesus did it in such a more profound way. And it reminded me of one of my favorite books, and you know, Dad, I talk about it a lot. It's by Corrie ten Boom, and it's called The Hiding Place. And if you've never read The Hiding Place, you need to go get it right now. And I want to just close with an excerpt from her. You know, she was in Ravensbrück in concentration camp. Unspeakable things were done to her. And she got out, miraculously got out. And she traveled all over teaching about the forgiveness of Jesus Christ and how he had forgiven her, and therefore she was able to forgive those who had abused her and tormented her. And she actually took this message back into Germany. And there was this one time where this SS guard that she sees in this church service, he had just come to Christ after she had spoken. And he comes up to her, and she recognizes him. She recognizes this was one of her main torturers in this concentration camp. And he talks about how his sins had been washed away, and he puts out his hand to shake Corrie ten Boom's, and I just want to read this to you. She says, "His hand was thrust out to shake mine, and I, who had preached so often to the people in Bloemendaal the need to forgive, kept my hand at my side. Even as the angry, vengeful thoughts boiled through me, I saw the sin of them. Jesus Christ had died for this man. Was I going to ask for more? Lord Jesus, I prayed, forgive me and help me to forgive him." She says, "I tried to smile. I struggled to raise my hand. I could not. I felt nothing, not the slightest spark of warmth or charity. And so again, I breathed a silent prayer. Jesus, I cannot forgive him. Give your forgiveness." As I took his hand, the most incredible thing happened. From my shoulder, along my arm, and through my hand, a current seemed to pass from me to him, while into my heart sprang a love for this stranger that almost overwhelmed me. And here it is. She says this, "And so I discovered that it is not on our forgiveness any more than on our goodness that the world's healing hinges, but on his." Let me just read that one more time. "I discovered that it is not on our forgiveness any more than on our goodness that the world's healing hinges, but on his. When he tells us to love our enemies, he gives, along with the command, the love itself." He gives, along with the command, the love himself. He gives the forgiveness with the command itself. It's incredible. If you've not received the forgiveness of Jesus Christ, I want to lead you and close you in a prayer so that you will be able to receive it not only for yourself, but also to be able to extend it to others. Would you pray with me? Lord Jesus, we cannot fathom what you did for us. We cannot fathom the forgiveness that you bestowed upon us because of your death and your resurrection. Today, I recognize that there is nothing that I can do to earn this. I just simply receive it. And I believe, Jesus, that you are the Son of God and you are the only way to the Father, and that you've covered all of my past, present, and future sin. Thank you for being the brother who took my place. And I will thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.